Thank you for coming this afternoon. I'm Representative Paul Schemmel. I'm privileged to speak on behalf of my colleagues in the Common Sense Caucus. The Common Sense Caucus has a singular mission: to be the voice of the taxpayer, the voice of the Pennsylvanians who pay for all of the things that we have determined that we as a state have to do. We owe it to them to be prudent spenders of their money. Next week, Governor Wolf will deliver his annual budget address where he will detail his spending priorities. The House and Senate will follow suit. In the process of the building next year, the budget will begin. The Common Sense Caucus will be here to participate, to advocate, and most importantly, to vote. We are a strong bloc of voters committed to controlling spending, and we are growing in number. Now let's talk for a minute about what we mean by controlling spending and just why that's important. To begin with, you can't spend more than you take in. That's basic economics. But in our annual struggle to balance the budget, we frequently overestimate revenues and underestimate expenditures. It seems that legislators are some of the most optimistic people that you will ever meet. As you can see from the chart marked state spending versus revenue, that optimism is frequently misplaced. Next, at a minimum, spending should never outpace growth. Inflation changes the buying power of a taxpayer's dollar. This is measured by metrics like the Consumer Price Index. As you can see from the chart marked state spending outpaces economy, Pennsylvania's spending has been rising faster than growth and on every measurable level. This means that taxpayers will not only have to pay more in taxes, but taxes will increasingly consume a greater percentage of their income. Well, you might be thinking that we have not had any broad-based tax increases for years despite increased spending. It's true that we've not raised income or sales taxes in Pennsylvania in several years, but we have annually raised taxes on targeted products, services, and industries. More importantly, we have masked the cost of our spending increases by underfunding our liabilities, like our pension fund, and permitting the expansion of certain industries, like gambling. Eventually, the cost of our overspending will catch up with us. Our pension funds will be depleted, and there will be nowhere left to build any more casinos. Overspending will eventually and always lead to higher taxes. Okay, so what if our taxes go up? Is that such a big deal? Is it that bad to ask the taxpayer to be a little more generous? Yes, it is that bad. Not because people aren't generous, but because people act rationally to increases in costs. All things being equal, there is an inverse relationship between tax increases and economic growth. As taxes increase, population and economic growth generally decline. We don't have to guess about this outcome. We can see it playing out in other states. An obvious example is Illinois, which dropped from the nation's 5th largest state to our 6th largest state last year. Earlier in the week, I was listening to NPR report on the negative impact of Illinois' high taxes. People are leaving, and in record numbers. This is also borne out in research conducted by the nonpartisan Pew Charitable Trust, which recently reported that taxes contribute to the cost of living and factor into people's thinking about moving. The same is even truer of businesses which consider carefully the expense of taxes when determining where to locate. Uncontrolled spending ultimately leads to higher taxes, which leads to dampened growth. The cycle of spending and taxes is particularly troubling when you look at the demographic trends for Pennsylvania. Our population growth has been anemic, significantly below the rate of growth nationally. This has resulted in an effective population decrease. In 2016, our state's population actually decreased. This puts our current haggling over congressional districts into a different perspective. It's almost like arguing over who gets first dinner seating on the Titanic. Enjoy it now, because Pennsylvania is slated to lose 1 or 2 of those congressional seats in the coming census. When you dig into our state data, you also see that our population is aging. People in their working, childbearing years are choosing to leave Pennsylvania in record numbers. That is placing an even greater burden on the taxpayers who remain and who will eventually have to make up the difference. So why is it important to control state spending? More specifically, why do we care about controlling state spending? When you strip away all of the political speak, it's not businesses, industry, or special interest groups. It's not because we're mean or don't want to be generous. It's because people make rational choices, and they react to what we do in this building. It's because I know that the guy who lives next door to me does not does better for his family when he has more money in his pocket and more freedom as to what he can do with it than when the government takes more from him and makes him more dependent upon it. In our modern economy, that guy next door is far more mobile and willing to go elsewhere than his parents are. He can get Steelers and Eagles games on his TV in Sparks, Nevada. In fact, there's probably even an Eagles and Steelers bar there, and this fact alone should tell us how we're doing as a state. I don't have to guess that it's true or not. Just look at the demographic shift from state to state. See where people are coming from and where they're choosing to move to. States which control spending are destinations of choice. They are places of economic vitality. I've been to Texas. It's doing a lot of great things, a lot of things right when it comes to growth and spending. But let me tell you, it's no paradise of natural beauty. The people behind me care about spending because they care about people. I don't have to guess if this is true or not. Just look at the demographic shift from state to state. So how are we in this Common Sense Caucus going to work to control spending? We're going to be engaged in the budget process. We're going to be active on our committees and within the broader caucus. We're going to speak to members individually. And we're advocating legislative solutions which impact our budget. I've summarized the problem, but the solution is in our 203 members. If you want to know how we're going to fix this, talk to some of the reps. Talk to some of the reps that are here. Representatives Mao, Tobash, and Coffer. They have offered excellent reforms on welfare. Representatives Kiefer, Phillips-Hill, and Speaker Turzai are advancing growth-oriented regulatory reforms. Representatives Grove, Ryan, Nelson, and Warner have bills reforming our budget process. That's just to name a few. There are more. And we hope we'll have some from both sides of the aisle. Approach these members and let them explain to you why their legislation advances the ball in controlling spending and how that has a positive impact on people's lives. Instead of soliciting a few sound bites, engage these guys in a genuine conversation. Tomorrow is Groundhog Day. We're all looking forward to hearing Punxsutawney Phil's prognostication. What you don't know is that old Phil has been checking out the cost of living and job opportunities in Irving, Texas. And he's finding he can trade his hole in the ground and dead-end job in Jefferson County for a nice gated community and modern office suite in the Lone Star State. Like other Pennsylvanians, Phil's going to make a rational choice as to where his own future lies. Our job in this building is to create public policy. Our job as legislators is to create public policy that makes Pennsylvania that choice location. With that, we have a few minutes for questions, if anyone would care to ask any.
So-called legislative leaders. So are you going around your leaders at this point in time? I mean, how's this going to work when none of you guys are actually at the negotiating table?
We're not going against or around our leaders. There are leaders that are part of the objectives that we seek. We simply seek to be an organized vote, a block of votes that is going to stand firm on spending, stand firm on growth.
Another one, I guess. A couple of years ago, the legislature mandated that the administration no longer use transportation money to pay for the state police. But there's no way but that same amount of money is still in the budget. The legislature didn't rescind that, so how is that common sense if there's one law that says you can't use transportation money for state police, but there's no other way to fix that? I mean, you have two contradicting budget laws at this point.
So the fiscal code that was passed was that 2 years ago put on a payment plan to start moving the money back into the general fund. That's still enacted today. If you look at the IFO budget analysis, there's $25 million shift from the motor licensing fund to the general fund to cover the state police. I think we should still continue to do that. I think that's a common sense approach to funding state police within the budget framework we're working on, not overspending what you have.
Do you have to rescind that last fiscal code?
The last fiscal code from?
Well, yeah, because there was nothing in there that rescinded that provision that you have to gradually start reducing the transportation money.
As far as I'm aware, we're going to continue phasing down the state police in the motor licensing fund and putting it back into the general fund. According to the IFO, that's $25 million in the 18-19 budget. I think that's a common sense solution to ensure transportation dollars are used for transportation projects, which provides economic growth to the Commonwealth while continuing the funding of the state police. Overall, we're advocating that the total expenditure of the budget does not exceed the revenues bringing in. More importantly, keep it in line with inflation so taxpayers can actually afford it moving forward.
The budget to be for the coming year.
So if you took last year's spend number and you multiplied it by the consumer price index, highest one in the state being Philadelphia's, it would be about 0.64%. That spend number would be about $32.1 billion.
Kind of you there, but do you have a bigger number just as people didn't show up today? Do you have a number that says our caucus is?
Yes.
What is that?
Yes.
Anything of note that you expect the governor to propose on Tuesday at this point? Anything that you can talk about that you might expect and that might be a surprise or anything like that?
I don't have any insights as to what the governor's going to present. Does anyone, any other member?
He keeps that pretty tight until the day of speech.
Your primary focus is going to be to keep spending under control, I guess, is that?
Keep spending under control. And once again, spending cannot exceed growth. It cannot exceed the rate of inflation. It can't exceed revenues. And actually, that's a target just to continue overspending, to be quite honest. So that should be a low target. We really should be doing more than that. But at the very least, we shouldn't be spending money that we don't have.
Really sort of a spending plan or something you can support, as well as maybe the documents for how to pay for it or how you see current state resources being used to do that, kind of like you did last year?
So we've offered there's some policy initiatives that we've been part of with the welfare reform, with the regulatory reform. There's many different initiatives and policies that have been introduced that would address some of this overspend and control those cost drivers.
Actual budget with related documents for.
No. We're working in coordination with our appropriations and our leadership.
Cuts to come their way in their local communities, and are you willing to explain what those are if that is if you have to keep it at the rate of inflation?
Yeah, so that's a moving target depending upon what reforms are there. But reforms are reforms. They can't always be characterized just as a cut. Sometimes a reform is a change in a program or a policy. It does have an impact. Maybe someone doesn't receive exactly what they received before in the same way. Maybe they receive something else. Maybe that provides additional opportunities for them. Frank, did you have something else that you wanted to add on that?
I would just encourage you to realize that just because the state spends it doesn't mean it was spent effectively. So when you look at what we're doing is we're looking at a total set of reforms in concert with the appropriation and the leadership to say, let's reform the way we do government in Pennsylvania, spend money effectively so that people get the services that they need and they deserve without feeling that any money that's spent by the state happens to be spent effectively. We happen to be outside the Lieutenant Governor's office, and that whole issue has been part of a whole series of debate and discussions. So we need to start being good custodians of the state and the taxpayer dollars.
I have an example of a regulatory issue. Then you're talking about how, it won't hurt someone or there won't be a cut, but it's better to do X this way.
Sure.
So when the administration was pushing the consolidation of health and human services, I had a great meeting with some of Governor Wolf's officials, some secretaries. They brought up as a portion of that is you have two departments that regulate one industry. They want to merge them together, and they wanted to coordinate the regulations. It was explained to me that there was a regulation where it was either fire extinguishers or the fire alarms. One agency required it like 3 feet, the other agency required it at 4 feet. So that individual all those regulated entities, depending on who showed up, they literally had to have two at two separate places. To me, that's an expense that didn't need to be made. They're spending money on putting in fire alarms or fire extinguishers that could have been helping actual programs for citizens. And that was just one small example that they brought up to light. I'm sure there's more littered throughout. I think if you were here for the Regulatory Reform Press Conference, the gentleman from the Mercatus Center highlighted perfectly that a regulation on its own merits dropped in as a little pebble in a creek doesn't amount to anything. But when you put millions of pebbles in a creek, you now block up the entire creek and water's not flowing anymore. It's the same thing with our economy. And you can see at the federal level how much economic growth we're seeing because the Trump administration is reducing regulations 22 to one new one they add. So, and that's economic growth. That's not taking more from taxpayers. That's getting taxpayers higher paychecks, more money in their wallets, and automatically they get a tax increase because they're making more money because of a percentage, and that is how you build growth in your state revenues.
Any other questions? Very well, thank you very much for coming out.